Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday.
Good afternoon again.
Good afternoon.
We're outdoors today.
Yes.
For the first time in this year.
Our first live outdoor video period, actually.
Yes. It's last week we were going to start. You had a little something come up, so Friday we weren't able to go live.
So we had to push
so
it back
we're here
to today.
Yeah, we're here on Wednesday now. Yep. But this is going to be, we're going to touch on a few things, right?
Yeah, some fun stuff, a little bit of political stuff regarding Facebook and the Mark Zuckerberg testimony to Congress. Did you catch any of that personally?
Yeah, I mean it's some dog and pony show, to say the least.
What do you mean by that?
I think that at the end of the day, I mean, we'll talk about it more into the intricacies, but I think some of the things that we want to get into is whether or not there's actually some type of substance involved with some of those conversations, and really how it plays out in our daily lives as far as
how it
kind
of affects our user experience.
Yeah, and the important thing is why we kind of address it is that, I mean, the venue of Facebook, I apologize for all the squinting, it's quite sunny out.
Yeah.
Which is nice. It's actually a splendid day.
It's feeling like spring, finally, today.
The big thing is whether or not, how those things are going to impact and why we're even in this conversation. And some of the things we'll talk about. But we're also going to get into the real estate side of things, right?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the top 3 biggest disaster stories.
Well, they're my personal disaster stories.
That he's experienced, whether on the buyer side or on the seller side, correct?
Well, they're disaster stories indeed. Some of them are legends. But the thing is that while we're talking about that is that a lot of things and a lot of perceptions involved with real estate in general. And I think when it comes to knowing how to respond to certain things that happen in a real estate transaction, and being that people aren't, it's not not many people are intimately involved in the regular process of selling a home. They may do it 2-3 times in their lifetime, and that's on the high side.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things that go into it, and being prepared for some of the things that I have personally witnessed, which were either disasters from a home standpoint, meaning physical damage. The other thing is financial damage and negotiation tactics that seem like they're good ideas, but wind up being costly in the end. But we'll go into each one of them. And
kind of some of the mistakes that those homeowners made, and things that you can look out for, so you can avoid similar
even some of the buyers out there.
Cover your butt.
Yeah, I mean it's because I think this. Unfortunately, I think so much gets lost in the moment because it's high stakes. So when you deal with high stakes transactions, we're not talking about. I mean, in our borough, the average sale price is $571,000 now.
74.
Mm-hmm. Right, as of last. As of last week, that was right.
Yeah.
The beginning of the month.
The beginning of the month.
So
for March.
The big thing is mitigating some of the emotional aspects to how bad decisions kind of play into a factor. Some things you don't even have a choice of, but the stories are rather profound. So they really become. These are the types of things that can happen. But let's delve into, this week was an interesting week on Capitol Hill.
Yes.
Mark Zuckerberg was on the stand in front of Congress.
An epic 2-day-long testimony about mostly the alleged data breaches, but also a little bit about Facebook monopolies. We talked about the fact that Facebook has a monopoly.
I think there was there's legitimate concerns, and there's some concerns that we've addressed privately. I'll address it publicly to the degree, but there's a reason why this happens, and I think it's misunderstood. And in the essence of the policymakers' decisions on the Facebook angle, and is when we talk about data and data breaches and how the lack of actual knowledge up on Capitol Hill plays a role.
Yeah, that was, to be honest, my biggest concern as far as people's concerns about the testimonies was kind of how out of touch some of the congressional representatives tended to be with just how Facebook works and how online cookies work, and the fact that all your browsing data is tracked in some way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. But also the important aspect is that how it impacts consumers like you, how it impacts companies, how it impacts our ability to reach people on a regular basis, which I said the Facebook platform has been an instrumental piece in a lot of business venues.
Including where we are right now.
Yeah, including where we are, which is, it's an important feature, but we have to talk about how we got here. And I think as the advent of the internet continued, a lot of it had to do with some questions. I'm going to go into one. We could get into some of these are some of the highlights that I would say really have some questionable. Like the way it's being addressed now is like the horse is out of the barn, then you're going back to the horse to ask how it got out of the barn when they were actually in control of that. I'll explain it to you quite simply. Basically, when we talk about Lindsey Graham, which was a Republican representative from South Carolina,
right,
talked about the monopoly angle of Facebook. The monopoly angle of Facebook being an issue. And here's the problem is that it's basically, and the problem is, and we talked about this at length, and you know how passionate I am about how this impacts business in general, is the Wall Street, Main Street component, is the way of competition in the modern era in the tech arena is consolidation, and consolidation has played a big part in the American economy in the sense that many industries across the board have consistently consolidated without actually being profitable.
And we actually printed out a roster of all of Facebook's acquisitions. I believe they own now 67 companies that have merged as part of Facebook.
Right.
The biggest one being Instagram.
Here's the thing is,
know about, but there are a lot of apps that Facebook has acquired that have actually helped the platform run, such as
but this is
the check-in and the status update was actually, for example, a startup that they acquired, that they purchased. There's 67 of these.
Right. There's acquisition processes which lead to, and then you have a representative say about, are you a monopoly? Well, the problem is that in the same vein that they look at this as being the problem, they're asking Mark Zuckerberg, are you a monopoly? This is a problem not for Facebook. This is a problem for every industry in America. So what happens is that we're going to take a look at Spotify, and I've vehemently have went absolutely bonkers over the fact that it trades at it, as it's making it's a $30 billion company. We looked at its record.
Right.
It's actually it's in $1.1 billion in deficit. Debt. Now
somehow is valued at 30
right
times.
Now they capitalize on this, and now what'll happen is that they'll take capitalization through selling their shares and purchase competition as a way of competing. And this is when you talk about Facebook and you talk about these big companies, how they get so big, why they have such platforms. There's basically it's the elimination of competition through the acquisition process, which is construed through Wall Street trading. So I mean,
and there's very little really regulation or oversight on
right. So what you have is that when you look at Facebook and you have senators questioning monopolies, when you're able to capitalize without producing profits to do so, and you're able to acquire anybody who's basically in competition with you, what do you expect to happen? So in the same vein, they need to look at themselves as part of the problem of why Facebook is where it is, because there is no regulation to the degree that would be necessary to enforce the same thing that they're arguing. Who is your competition? Well, who set the rules for this? The competition is being eliminated because at one time you'd say, well, how does a company acquire so many assets without being profitable? I mean, so if you could raise money to the tune of trillions of dollars in Facebook's case, not ever really being profitable, but buy out competition, the nature is that the stronghold for the company becomes the acquisition and the removal of competition instead of product and service lines that may or may not be conducive to competition. So but this is something that when the policymakers on Capitol Hill want to blame Facebook, and Facebook has Facebook is a great venue. I don't. What's going on is not Facebook's fault. I want to make that clear. You can't blame. They have to do, because in essence they're in competition at that level with a bunch of other companies who would seek to do the same exact thing. So you have to kind of compete. These companies are forced to compete through acquisition because their competitors compete through the same way.
And Mark Zuckerberg actually said he would be open to some degree of regulation, but to the extent that we're talking about acquisitions and breaking up monopolies, it didn't really seem like that was talked about.
Well, because this is the problem. Using regulation against companies for what they're doing based on acquisitions. Now, every single industry in America has consolidated itself, and basically it's been done through this process, which is a lot of companies not profitable at all, go out, get huge sums of capital through the sale of company shares, and acquire businesses that are up and coming or maybe a future threat. And even you look at the Zillow, Truly Emerger, the same thing. Now you take two tech companies that basically in competition with one another, one buys the second biggest competition as a way of acquiring basically all the eyeballs. Now this,
we have
if they
some
really,
on that actually. Zillow acquired Trulia for $3.5 million, and their total assets are only $2.5 million.
I think the issue is that they basically acquired competition, and they still haven't turned a profit yet. Now,
every year they continue to be in the red.
So, and they took over a competition who hasn't been profitable either. But yet, the money to acquire this type of venue at the rate that how are you going to increase competition when we have unproven models being funded at this capacity, and then go to look at Lindsey Graham's statements about monopolies and say to ourselves, well, is it Mark Zuckerberg's fault? No, it's not. It's not his fault. This is the playing field that was leveraged against. And I've said this before. This is the biggest threat to the American economy. So when you look at it from that perspective, you have to look at, does it impact how the nature of companies compete in the future? It's like you're either a Wall Street traded company that could raise capital at huge sums of money, or and acquire basically any competition you have, profitable or not, and just eliminate competition to the point where, and you have $30 billion invested in now Spotify, which is, and hasn't turned a profit, has been negative $1 billion. There's something fundamentally wrong.
Change.
I mean, it goes to the fundamental structures, as we're here in a hearing about what Facebook has become as a monopoly. Well, sure. I mean, but
also Mark Zuckerberg has not broken any laws that I'm aware of.
No, there's nothing.
No.
The ability to acquire these companies through these means has been a way of business. It happened with the banking industry. And the same reason, if you could go back and say, well, if you look at Facebook and what happened, let's look at the banking community and the acquisition of the too big to fail mentality. It was acquired the same exact way.
Right.
The too big to fail. And this is being done through an acquisition process, which is not fundamentally sound to keep a
healthy
competition
in the economy.
It's a healthy sense of competition, and then people want to say income distribution and like why this is happening and why does it seem like there's bigger gaps between the winners and losers in the American economy. A lot of it has to do with the structure of which the business nature operates. So, I can get into the details of it, but the testimony is, are you a monopoly? And for a sitting senator to ask at this point, are you a monopoly? That's a question that should be asked 5 years ago when we had the mortgage meltdown in the same vein. What does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, for what does that actually mean that you have these companies now consolidated to the point of too big to fail? You see a thing with the news media, and a company puts out a series of memos for everybody to read verbatim. And why? Because the local markets, one time were independent entities, are now structured in such a way that there's no competition at any level. So what happens? You get these types of across-the-board narratives. 5 companies own it all, and this is what you get.
Yeah, essentially, there's no way that anyone can really compete with Facebook at this point. And
but how? I mean, fundamentally, it's not even possible. The type of capital you would need to kind of compete with that, it's like, is it too big to fail? And Mike, the question, and it's not Mark Zuckerberg's fault that happened.
Right. Like I said, I don't think
they're on Capitol Hill questioning this with the after effect of policies that were actually were enacted before this even happened, and it should have been looked at many years ago. Is the acquisition process of American businesses. And you hear, the funny thing is if I don't like my Ford, I buy a Chevy. And then in the same vein, the two companies went.
The worst example he could have used.
Yeah, which is a horrible example, because Ford didn't get a bailout money, but Chevy did. And the nature of competition is eliminated because a failing company was able to go knock on the door of the White House and say, well, we're going to lose 100,000 jobs if we do this, and they get subsidized not to compete,
which is not real competition.
So do you have a monopoly in the auto industry? In the same vein, the inability to innovate is probably the problem of why those companies failed. And this has been the problem becomes so systemic that this has become somewhat of political theater than it is about the realities of the hardcore things that really come before these questions are being asked. So from Mark Zuckerberg's point of view, and they're asking him detailed, intimate questions on a company as large as that. I mean, you got to realize he's a CEO of a company. How far removed is he now from the everyday process of the decision making? And they're expecting him to answer as if he was running a 3-person shop. It's theater, and it's not substance. And at the end of the day, nothing's going to be answered through that. And then
I kind of couldn't get over how much anger was directed toward him, for the use of people's personal data, which is really, at the end of the day, do you realize how benign the data is that they're using? This is, your age, your marital status, your basically demographic facts about you. I mean, Facebook is not storing your private conversations. Like, I didn't really understand what where the anger was coming from.
Well, someone held up a book of the policy recommendation, like the disclosure. When you sign up for Facebook, can we make simple language for people to understand what's happening with their data? Well, the reason why they have to make the data that large is because the same legislation that makes these disclosures part of their way of doing business has to be 50 pages. So it's theater at the end of the day. But the big thing is that I look at Facebook is that many people have survived our industry. I believe it or not, I do think that it's the positives so far. I mean, yes, the data being used in such a way that people don't quite understand. We've talked about. I'm not going to get into how many things are collecting data at the moment. We're talking at this.
Right, and I don't even think Mark Zuckerberg is completely aware of those things because he's not a
He's not in the day-to-day operations. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, but even if he did, the phone company, the data is stored. And most people, for the purposes of throwing their hands up and saying, well, this is just the way things are, is the result. The problem is that many people didn't, ignorance is bliss until it's a problem. That's the issue, is that you have to understand, and I'm not saying for everyday people, but you cannot go up into the halls of Congress with this little knowledge about the systems of business that are in play that lead to these things, and then create political theater at the end of the day, which I believe at the end of the day it's showsmanship. Who's going to get the best soundbite, and that's the way the mainstream media portrays it. It's like, let's get some good sound bites. The fundamentals of really how it got to that point were never really addressed. So what it is you have a nice show, and then they're going to ask Mark Zuckerberg for recommendations on how to. Now, after they get through the part of berating him, the same people asked him for recommendation. You can't do that. You can't ask private company who has private interests to help them make recommendations on Capitol Hill.
I mean, it's really even clear on what they wanted out of him, I don't think. And it's frustrating to me because I think what's important for people to understand is that nothing is free. You use Facebook for free. It doesn't cost you anything. So someone has to pay their coders. Somebody has to pay for the infrastructure of Facebook, which is very expensive to maintain.
Right.
So how does he do that? How is Facebook funded?
Right. They leverage data as a way.
Through leveraging your data to target ads specifically to you. And he's actually a genius in the way that he's been able to do that. Again, this is not actually anything that's new. I mean, anybody who browses on the internet for a spatula, for instance, on Amazon, through Google Ads, that spatula is going to follow you everywhere.
Yeah.
So all over the internet. If you put that in your cart, and how do you think that happened? Google tracked your search history.
Right.
And,
so I mean,
so this is not Facebook's invention. This is a way to monetize. Again, Google is another free service. It's a way to monetize a free service so that consumers don't have to pay for it.
Right. I mean, but again, like I said, when you talk about the nature of competition and how that happens, I think there's a bigger systemic problem with how the structure of business operates and the capitalization and acquisition of competitors from a Wall Street standpoint. So if we're really going to take a look at the issue, you have to look at the merger and acquisition process as a way of solving the fundamentals of why these things essentially happen and the too big to fail mentality that's associated with this particular thing. So you do have to look at that as being the piece to say, well, why do people assume that they're a monopoly? Well, they're the first ones through the door, and essentially through the capitalization rates that they can take and acquire.
They're the only ones through the door.
I mean, who's going to come up with the type of capitalization that will be necessary to compete? I mean, that's the nature. Who could come out, and I don't care how innovative the idea. Now, even if someone came up with the innovative idea, it's going to be bought out before it becomes competition again. So if you look at the nature of what happened,
Facebook, maybe.
Well, right, and that's that. At the end of the day, is stifling the growth process of the innovations that may say, well, we could offer services that may be less intrusive, or whatever it may be, or give people choices. But when you're that big, I mean, you're essentially. I would consider Facebook almost the state of maybe public utility, but I wouldn't classify it that, because I'm going to say this, that this has nothing to do with Facebook. Facebook is given the avenue, they drove it, and it's not, they have to, and in essence, they have to compete this way as a way of doing business the same way. You can't just, they're going to say, well, the corporate responsibility aspect, but if he's in play with other people who are willing to do this, capitalize their competition this way, what are you really left to do? Except what Facebook did, which is acquire competition this way. It's either he did it or somebody else does it. So how do you mitigate that is something that you really have to think about.
And I mean, we do have laws against monopolies, but they don't seem to be applied here.
Well, I think the thing when they use monopoly in the terms of where they come from, monopolies from the from the railroad industries. Back in the 1800s, basically, and the acquisition of railroads by one or two companies, of course. The telephone company was the same thing. Mm-hmm. The question becomes is that for some reason the technology is the biggest discrepancy between the people who make the policy and understand it and the people who actually legislating based on limited knowledge capacity of how these things work.
That is part of the problem. I read that the average age of Congress members questioning Mark Zuckerberg was 62. And there was like a advisory council that put the event together, and the average age was almost 80 years old. So not really a generation that kind of understands the fundamentals of digital business.
Yeah, but I think the biggest thing is that, and then taking recommendations essentially from Facebook about how competition should be divvied up. I mean, we'll take it at face value. I
think they just don't have a clue, and that's why they're asking for his recommendation.
Which is an awful precedence, to say the least. But but how it impacts us and how it impacts small business, and I would say this to a large degree. Even small businesses need avenues to compete at certain levels. Fortunately, Facebook has done that in so much as given opportunities to compete. With a platform that reaches a lot of people, and does it regularly. But the thing is how that's the rules that we have to apply to get the right audiences and things like that is there's a lot of control involving that. But again, this is what it is. I think that at the end of the day, from the Zillow Trulia perspective, the Facebook perspective, acquisition processes of industries in same lines as a way of competing is probably the largest issue with technology today, and why they're able to get data at the level that they're getting it at, because limited competition.
Yeah, there's really no other outlet.
Right, so you're not giving, and then what are you going to do, regulate that? Then we have regulated, quasi-regulate. I don't know how that would work as far as developing further innovation. But using regulation, because a lot of the times now the regulations that would be imposed in such an issue will wind up hurting the startup that needs to compete. So it's like, we're going to regulate Facebook at the expense of competition at lower levels, because you got to remember, regulation on that level is going to impact everything behind it.
Right.
So to the tune of, if there's more compliance issues regulating this, how do you expect a smaller startup who would be more of a natural competition mitigate that? So, you got to think about it for, at large. Is regulation the answer to everything that businesses need to do to perform? Again, this is a problem of, definitely the cart before the horse situation. So I really think from that perspective, you have to look at the fundamental nature of competition through the acquisition process, using funding, not too far away from here as a way to accomplish that. So, but again, you can't. That's not a question for Facebook to answer, and the people who the mechanisms of business is what led to that, not the business. And that's the issue that was never addressed. And if they were to take a look at that, that's really the key to understanding why they had what they had with Facebook. And, and again, I will say this, they don't like Facebook because they lack the control. People control the venue. The biggest avenue and the biggest problem with Facebook currently, and the people that badger it, is because they lack the nature of control over which information is shared. And that is done through through networks, and for a long time that network was in place. That whether it was through media favoritism or whatever, wasn't able to kind of get through that firewall. Facebook and the sharing of information was the firewall breach for a lot of people, and people didn't like the result.
And the populist movement, essentially.
Yeah, a populist movement, right? For the first time, the guy in the street corner who could only yell in City Hall Park now as a venue of
now could have a YouTube channel.
right.
Yeah.
Could have a YouTube channel or a
video
Facebook
for that
page,
matter.
and all of a sudden it's relevant news. And I really think that at the end of the day, some of the people, you could like Donald Trump, you could hate Donald Trump. That was the firewall that he breached to get to where he needed to go. The problem is the people who now see that as a problem, see that as a threat to maybe the way they do things as the issue here. And that's why you said to me before this, the anger directed at one person was really paramount to really understanding
right.
just the lack of communication there of really what goes on. And to say the least, if the people responsible, they looked at the entity, not the practice of getting to that point as being the issue, and it should have been looked at as the issue. But we can get into that. It's a long thing. We do real estate, but I always like to keep people abreast of the technology angles and some of the things
particularly on the platform that we use to talk to you.
Right, on Facebook.
So that's why
which I do happen to love very much. So Facebook is a great thing. It's a great tool, and you can't ask for a better tool for what we do. So YouTube is big, but getting people directly, I think this is one of the best ways to do it.
Yeah, I agree.
So one of the things you wanted to talk about was
the biggest home horror biggest real estate horror stories of your career. Well, you've personally experienced.
And how to avoid them if you're a homeowner.
Or a buyer. You have one
or
on
a buyer,
also,
yes.
On that side of the transaction.
And like I said, what we talked about this a little bit beforehand, is, this is not something, like I said, that people do every day. So there's a kind of a disconnect between knowledge base, what they read online, even some of the advice they're given. But these are the wild cards that kind of pop up that really are never ever discussed as a possible consequence of getting the right price. So you'll see an article online, how do you get the right price for your house? What they didn't equate is one of the things we'll go into disaster stories about how much some of these things, if they not aware of other factors, how much it can cost them.
Yeah, ultimately how much
but the very first
small price difference can affect you in interest rates over time.
Right. So I mean, but I will tell you, the nature of real estate is one of the most emotional processes someone will get to.
Which it makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is like the biggest investment that you probably ever make. So there's going to be some emotions involved. So
I do have the one legendary story of the house that burned down on the day of closing.
That's why I put it in the description. Went down in flames, literally.
Right. It was about. So this is one disaster story that's kind of takes its toll. I mean, at the time the market was heading down south. A lot of people couldn't afford to, keep the properties that they were in. Short sales. This happened to be a short sale at the time.
And this was around what time? Like 2009?
Yeah, this is 2000. Yes, 2009. 2009. About March 2009. For the sake of the people involved, I'm not going to mention addresses, but this is a true story. But it was in Newdorp, not too far actually where I grew up in. The negotiation for the short sale, the house was on the market for about 8 months. We finally negotiate with the bank, the homeowner, on a price to sell the property. Now the
You're
disaster.
going to the closing table.
Well, we've never made it to the closing table.
Not quite.
But the interesting thing is that the house was vacant, and you're all ready to go. As a real estate person, people have to understand. Really, your payday is the day of closing,
right,
or a couple of days after. But it's like what you come to expect. The call comes and you got to go. This is essentially a paycheck. So what happens is we get the call. Everything. Wow, this one of the smoothest short sale transactions you can get. The morning of, The person who was purchasing the property happened to be a police officer. So he gets a call over the radio, and I get a call about 6 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, wow.
6 o'clock in the morning, and he says, Anthony, he says, I'm not sure, I heard on the radio that my house that we're closing on at 11 o'clock is on fire. I said,
5 hours before the closing.
Yeah, 5 hours before the closing. I said, wait a minute. I said, on fire? I said, this can't be. So in kind of a stupor, I ran. First I had to pause to make sure, because the call was at 6 o'clock, a little just after 6, maybe 6:05. It was really early. I mean, I usually get up early anyhow, so it wasn't too bad, but it still was unexpected at the time. So I kind of like, first I had to think, am I dreaming for a second? And I said, I looked at my phone again. I said, yeah, no, this really happened. I said, so I called him back. I said, listen, I'm gonna go shoot over there, take a look. Get in the car, go over there. Lo and behold, the firemen and fire trucks waiting outside, putting out the flames of a huge.
So this house did not close.
3-alarm fire. 3-alarm fire that happened on the day of closing. Now, from that perspective, is that that's not an avoidable situation, at least to the degree.
At least not for the person who did.
I mean, some people suggest that maybe it was foul play involved. I won't speculate, but that's the number one disaster story that I think I've told to people, and it's one of the ones that they find hard to believe.
But had that happened 1 day later, would the buyer have been liable for it? Because they were not in this case.
I hate to say, the day of closing, when you assign title, the other buyer is responsible. The only caveat to that was there an inherent problem structurally, or an issue that was severe enough that should have been noted to the buyer that it actually happened, that something like this was possible. The house did get a home inspection. The house, to say how responsible it is based on home inspection, there's been a lot of back and forth laws regarding this. So the homeowner, to a degree, I read of one case where the disclosure rules, if they don't fill out the disclosure, in New York State you have to fill out, it's like a 25-page disclosure for residential real estate.
Okay.
That basically you write down the latent defects that are possible, or that you should make note of. There's a $500 fee for waiving it. In this particular case, if you waive the fee, you get the home inspection. I have seen some cases. There was one case where a home inspection, a judge ruled in Manhattan that it was on the due diligence aspect. There was a defect, not in the terms of where it would be notable from a structural standpoint, but a defect nonetheless. That basically the judge ruled that the buyer's home inspection for a defect like this should have been done or performed to mitigate that as being acquiring enough knowledge to make a purchase decision. So they disagreed with the buyer in that particular case. But it's the thing about it is yes, as soon as you purchase a home, the day you sign title, even if the person is renting, and that typically happens a lot, they give the 5-day window to move out, but there's still liabilities associated with the new ownership. So fires being set, if a fire or an accident happens, even after title, it's still the new owner's responsibility on the day of that title, on the day of closing.
So should they make sure that on the day of the closing they're properly insured against things like this? Yeah,
I mean, this is something that, and I can't quote exactly whether there's actually provisions in certain insurance premiums or the ability to get riders on this particular stuff if someone actually stays in the house after the day of closing. But we'll look into that more and get maybe an answer for some people who are watching that.
Yeah,
the next one
is the buyer who made an offer on a home on the condition that the boiler was replaced, and the seller refused. So what happened with that?
Okay, so this is the trick with negotiations when it comes to home selling. Basically, and this is one case, then there's other cases where we kind of let the ego of the homeowner take precedence over the value perspectives being granted at the time. So, and one of the things, if you have to replace something, and the buyer requests it, and you have to, a lot of people will take even the advice over their agent to say, listen, if they're going to ask for a $5,000 credit, it may be best to take the $5,000 credit. And some people think, well, the agent's trying to make money on the sale on their back. You know, they're pushing me for the sale. They're pushing me for the sale. I don't want to do this. I'm pushing me for the sale. But in that particular instance, and the homeowner, I think, passed up a great offer and lost, and then put the house back on the market after it was accepted, and then 7-8 months later wound up taking $75,000 less on the property for not giving a concession. I think at the time it was $10,000. So
he lost $65,000 out of stubbornness.
Yes. So I mean, but that's not, people. There's an emotional attachment to to what goes on, in the sense that this is my home. This is my home. How come? They feel out of control of a process, and sometimes even against the advice of people, and that has a lot to do with the trust level of people inside the industry itself. I think some people really believe that, some agents, and that may be the case. I can't give a blanket. Nobody's like this, but your reputation stakes a lot into whether someone's going to use and you're going to continue to stay in business for a long time. So basically, you have to be aware of the factors that may be playing against you in a negotiation, even if it requires some concession of some type. So, and I've seen it. Some people get an asking price offer. First one, asking price offer. Person comes in and says, "Look, there's some cracks in the foundation. I want the crack in the foundation repaired, or $5,000 credit." What do you mean? I had 60 buyers. The person and the people who are responsible, the agent, would have to weigh a lot of factors in to say what's the best determination as to what they think based on the comps in the area, what they've sold for, their basic knowledge of the inventory, are there competing houses, and is there enough there to negotiate, or is it better off just settling the $5,000 right then and there and ending it? So you really have to look at every aspect of the transaction. Is that there's not always something? Yeah, the status of the market, and you have to see whether or not the idea associated with a lot of anger because of the fact that they're playing games, whatever it may be, that pulling out of a deal because of someone's inability to negotiate has cost, I could say, homeowners a ton. But there's probably a lot of agents out there as well that probably look at it and say, hey, this is something that happens to me quite frequently, that we're negotiating $5,000, 3 months later they're negotiating a deal that's $20,000 less than what that was if they gave the concession. So you have to trust the people around you, and if you don't, that's something you should settle up before you sign a listing agreement with somebody. You can't have that level of trust that they're going to be upfront about, like, the pitfalls. And most of the time, when I deal with homeowners, it's basically I go over the consequential things of this particular aspect of negotiating. So settling up at the beginning, making sure that part of your initiation of telling somebody how you're going to go about selling a house, you should do what I call mitigate emotional barriers to sale. So you have to express situations in the same way that I'm expressing them here. Tell them these are the possibilities, and you can't put yourself in an emotional state to discuss.
Okay, actually, it declined itself. This is funny you bring up emotions, because I'm reminded actually of the time that my parents sold our starter home when I was 5 years old, and they ended up conceding. They let go of our backyard playground set as part of the
as part of negotiation.
Yeah, they let it go. They accepted the fact that they were already now paying 2 mortgages because they had purchased our new house, and it just wasn't, yes. I love that place set. It was an emotional thing for us to have to let go, but I think my parents made the logical decision in, getting a buyer because they didn't want to have to pay 2 mortgages.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain things. And then we're going to look at the buyer side mistake.
Yes.
So do you want to?
So this one has to deal with haggling over $3,000. Ended up costing the home buyer, you said, about $75,000 because of an interest spike. $75,000.
The funny thing that you will find about negotiations, and I know there's people, real estate people that are out there who are watching, is I have the magic number 5,000. Everybody knows the 5,000 rule when it comes to negotiating. The 5,000 rule is every deal at the end gets hung up on $5,000, and it could be a $450,000 house, or it could be an $800,000 house, and you know what I'm talking about out there. $5,000
It'd make or break a deal, huh?
Yeah, I mean, the level of angst and anger at this particular piece of real estate is something to behold. If you're not used to this as a homeowner, know that every deal is likely to come down to $5,000. I've done this enough to know. I deal with the agents in the office who all get hung up on this $5,000 rule. That it always seems that the buyer and seller will always come to the $5,000, and who makes the compromise is is the winner. But for no fundamental reason other than winning. Because when you talk about a $550,000 house, and you're arguing over the $5,000, and you include taxes and fees and stuff like that.
I mean, that's like 1 or 2 months of mortgage payments. That's about it.
But here's the thing about it. People hold value in their mind as being the reality of the situation. So this is like, how do I say, my house is listed at $550, so that's what it's worth. So they believe, in essence, when they get down to negotiation, that the $550 is actually in their hand. So they negotiate
regardless of what the market is demanding.
Well, regardless of whether the offer that's made is being made, is I'm taking less for the house, but you never got there, so you can't use that as an argument. And I find that to be as I said, the value of a house is always determined by the first offer, because that's the only person willing to pay for it at that given time. So, and I know this is a hard thing to get over, but it is something that's very real. And if the real estate agents that are out there that watch this know this, these are disaster stories right around this particular issue. So what you really want to do is understand, even from the buyer perspective, there's losses on that end, okay?
Right.
The buyer, I had a buyer once that went in, negotiated, but his you go out, you get a lock-in, for your rate.
Your interest rate.
Right. But there was an interest rate spike back in August of, I think it's like 2010, somewhere, a spike of like
0.75%.
Yeah, it was like almost a full percent over the course of 2 days, but it was like 0.75. And I can't quote exactly what the number is, but they negotiated over $5,000. Subsequently, the time it took to negotiate the deal, which was an extra 3 days, his lock expires.
Excuse me.
His lock expires. So now, over the $5,000 haggling, it's going to cost him about $70,000
over the course of the 30
over the course of the 30-year loan. So we negotiated $5,000 down at the cost of $70,000
I think it was
over
less
30
than
years.
you said $3,000.
Yeah, I mean it's come down to less. I mean the nuances of the communications, but it's still paramount. I may have misquoted it, maybe 3,000, 3,000, 5,000, but it amounted to somewhere around that 70,000 mark that wound up being lost over the course of 30 years. And then on top of the negotiation of 5,000, they expected the seller to come down even further because their interest rate lock expired, and then says, well, I need to come down another 10 to buy. So, and it didn't happen. The deal actually died on that premise.
On that $3,000.
Right.
Which again, very similar to the boiler story. Something really petty ended up killing the deal.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that the issue always becomes is, do you negotiate yourself out of, in some cases, tens and as much as $100,000, and I've seen it in a lot of cases. This isn't the only horror story. I actually had someone argue of a 0.2 interest rate on the sale of a $2.3 million seller-financed home, set of buildings, and argue over, I believe it was 0.25% in a market that was on the decline. And I said, this is silly, guys, and it died. It died on the idea that somehow they were getting rooked on a 0.25%, because again, the emotional aspects to the deal become even more pressing than the financial end of it. So you find that most people who don't do this regularly always kind of accept accept the fact that emotions are going to impede their value somehow, because, and I do think the agents out there have to do a better job explaining the emotional aspects of the sale as much as the financial ones, because the pitfalls are essentially the ones that usually leave people in a very bad position. And then when it doesn't go right, chances are, like, just say that negotiation goes bad, there's a remorse factor, and that usually gets directed back at the agent.
Right.
So after they realize they didn't do the transaction, it singles itself back toward the agent, and the agent decides, hey, the listing expires, and they go relist the house. It sells 3 days later, and they're very upset about it. So, but in essence, if they're going over the processes of these type of circumstances on the emotional end, they'll do a better job of keeping deals together, mitigating expectations in their deal, and providing a better service overall. Because there's nothing better when I have had the situation arise to say that this is something we discussed at the beginning, and refresh their memory that I'll say, remember the story I told you about the other person who decided this way, and look what happened. And I could tell you on every instance that is a money-saving move on the seller's behalf if that's exactly what they're doing. You can't underestimate how negotiations are not just, you're not negotiating just the terms, you're negotiating the emotions, and that's negotiating emotions is probably more prevalent.
The hardest part.
Right, is really the hardest part of the transaction in a lot of respects, because you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're dealing with most people's life. In the sense they've lived there, there's a personal pride associated with it, and you're dealing with all the things that the mind, it's the intrinsic value. It's like it's like a wedding ring. If you go to a wedding ring and somebody at the you go to sell it, you may think it's worth $10,000. The person buying it only thinks it's worth $3,000. So so the sentimental value that sometimes is placed on these things get people off track. So it's important to kind of mitigate emotions as part of the realities of transacting real estate.
to make the most practical decision.
Yes, the practical decisions. There's nothing practical about real estate, though.
No.
No, I mean it seems practical, but it's always a jaunt down an emotional roller coaster, and there are very few businesses where you could see, and I think some people misunderstand the amount of emotional efforts it takes on behalf of good real estate people. That's the fun with broadcasting.
The emotional effort of that truck behind us.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of being outdoors.
Live video.
But again, to mitigate those things are huge, and good real estate agents know the value of that. But it's a tough jaunt, and I can't help but squint a lot because I could do sunglasses right now. So,
yeah.
We're going to be back on Friday, because Friday is always our day we do this.
Our day we do this.
So we have a lot of research to do, and we're going to talk about a few things, and we have topics yet to discuss. We're going to talk about them after we're finished here.
Yes, we are. So
doing the research part of this is the most difficult.
When we know our topic, you'll know. So be sure to check it again on Friday.
Do we always know our topic?
Ahead of time. Well, before Friday we do.
Do I go off topic? She always claims that I ramble a lot, and you guys can tell me I ramble. I could ramble quite a bit, but like I said, my thoughts kind of outpace my ability to speak them. Is that what happens?
Yeah, I don't know if it's as much of you off topic as it is of just so much going on in there. You don't know how to separate.
There's a lot going on there. A lot.
How to separate the important bits from the rambling bits, and it kind of just all meshes together. But
all right. She's used to editing my videos.
You put me, we're put on the spot here. I know it's nothing like live video.
Right, live
I
sneezed.
We're squinting in the sun.
Yeah.
Trucks behind us.
That's it. It's all fun. But we're going to do it again in a couple more days, and hopefully, if you have something that you'd like us to address, you can have Hannah research it for you.
I'll read the comments. I always do.
We'll look into it. We'll get back to you, and we'll do some more some more
of this.
Yes, some more of this and that.
Some more of this.
And I'm sure we also didn't talk about the Jersey Shore. It's back on. Did you catch the latest episode? They were in your neck of the woods. They're down in Florida.
Oh, they were. See, I don't know. This isn't news to me. I guess it's the Jersey Shore's news to you. Same old.
It's not news.
How is it the Jersey Shore if they're in Florida?
It's the Jersey Shore visits Florida, but now they're middle-aged. So
Snooki's back, y'all.
Yeah, but it's just it can't be anything but a train wreck. But fortunately, I haven't watched it.
No.
Anyway, till
either.
next time, folks. Leave your questions, leave your responses, leave your thumbs up.
Leave your thumbs up, leave your suggestions, what have you.
Yeah.
We read them all.
And if you don't try to throw a brick from the street either. We can catch you downstairs in video.
Don't give them any ideas. Come on, now I'm scared.
It's signing off, folks. Till next time, we'll see you Friday.
Signing off. I will see you Friday.